Hey folks, this review, believe it or not, has been through about 5 different iterations in the last 2 months. Originally, this was set up as a £550 GPU shootout, the price that these cards were when I purchased them. But thanks to the incredible volatility in the market, prices have swung back and forth, and in the weeks that followed, any conclusions that I drew regarding price to performance were pretty worthless at that point. On top of that, AMD released their FSR upscaling technology, again changing up some of the main comparison and discussion points that I originally had. Prices though are now starting to level off after dropping a bit. And with the incoming launch of the RX 6600 XT fairly soon, I think now is finally the time to revisit this comparison and see how it all pans out. So gone is my original £550 comparison, as while the RTX 3060 can now be had once again at the same price I paid, £549, the cheapest RX 6700 XT is now £100 more than I bought mine for, at £649. Yeah. Still, that difference might just swing things in Nvidia's favour, so it should actually make for a much more interesting battle this time around. The RX 6700 XT features a 40 compute unit design based on the 7nm RDNA 2 architecture, giving us 2560 SPs, 160 TMUs and 64 ROPs. It also gives us 12GB of 16GB per second GDDR6 on a 192-bit bus. And you might be thinking that this does look really familiar to the old RX 5700 XT, which featured a really similar spec and was based on a 7nm process node too, but measuring the 6700 XT die actually shows that it's around 33% larger than the 5700 XT, and this is thanks to the inclusion of 40 dedicated ray tracing accelerators and also 96MB of what AMD calls Infinity Cache, which talks to the GPU over a 1024-bit bus, offering up 1.5TB per second of bandwidth. In-game, the RX 6700 XT settles in around the 2.5GHz mark in terms of clock speed. Now the 3060 is based on Nvidia's 8nm Ampere architecture. It features 28 SMs, giving us a total of 3584 shading units, 112 TMUs and 48 ROPs. The card also has 28 second generation ray tracing accelerator cores. Nvidia's paired it with 12GB of 15GB per second GDDR6 memory, and like the 6700 XT, it uses a 192-bit memory interface. When it comes to clock speeds, the RTX 3060 will settle in around 50MHz shy of the 2GHz mark. And it should be noted that unlike the GPU used by AMD on the 6700 XT, the desktop version of the RTX 3060 does not use the full-fat GA106 die, as Nvidia has kept the full dies with 30 SMs, 30 ray tracing cores and 3840 CUDA cores for laptops at this stage. So we've got 2 pretty different approaches to performance at this mid-range level. AMD with its much faster clocking chip, bandwidth-defying Infinity Cache and more TMUs and ROPs, compared to Nvidia's more mature ray tracing cores, more raw shading units and machine learning hardware in the form of its tensor cores. The question really is, which one of these should you be looking at for the price? Now I'm going to split this video into a few sections. Firstly, rasterization, and then we're going to look at both ray tracing and upsampling technologies, as both are important despite really still being in their infancy. We'll jump into traditional rasterized games first, and all of these have been run on my overclocked Ryzen 7 3900X system, which is equipped with 32GB of DDR4 memory. Resizable bar has been disabled at this point, and all these games have been tested at my monitor's native resolution of 2560 by 1440. Watch Dogs Legion's up first, on the Ultra preset with RT turned off. And here the 6700 XT managed to average above 60 FPS with its 1% lows above 50. The 3060 on the other hand, it doesn't manage to hit 50 FPS on the average, while its 1% lows was actually just in the high 30s, which is quite a poor showing for the Nvidia card, since this is an Nvidia sponsored title. An AMD sponsored title next, with Godfall on the epic quality settings, and the Nvidia card puts in a much better show in here, almost averaging 60 FPS, while the 1% lows was almost coming in at 50. The AMD card, however, manages to average 85 FPS with its 1% lows hitting 60, so a much smoother experience. Horizon Zero Dawn on the ultimate quality preset, and the 6700 XT once again rampages above the 3060, averaging 93 FPS compared to the RTX 3060's 75. And it was a similar story once again for Assassin's Creed Valhalla on the Ultra preset, the 6700 XT averaging 74 FPS on average with its 1% lows being respectably above 50. The RTX 3060 on the other hand, its average was well below 60, coming in at 50, and the 1% lows was only 40 FPS. Now I could show you more graphs and more games, but really the story doesn't change from what we've already seen. The aggregate results of these tests is that the 6700 XT beats out the RTX 3060 in rasterized only games by around 34% on average and 33% when it comes to the 1% lows. That said, while it is nice to have that extra 30% or so performance, in single player games like Horizon or Assassin's Creed, it's not going to completely break the experience, say playing with 58 FPS compared to 78, especially when you factor in FreeSync monitors. But the one game for me where it was an issue was in the multiplayer portion of Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, and by extension Call of Duty Warzone. Now these are games where, by their very nature, you're generally running at higher FPS anyway than with something like Watch Dogs. But using the same settings and dependent on the map, loadout and game mode, the RTX 3060 was still anywhere from 25% to 40% slower at 1440p than the 6700 XT, and that can definitely be felt in a multiplayer game. Now, a consistent 30% performance gap is what we would have called a few years ago a complete landslide victory, but it is important to remember that things are not that simple now, and with the addition of ray tracing functionality and upscaling in the form of DLSS and now FSR, pure rasterization, well, still really the most important area, it's not the final nail in the coffin anymore. Black Ops Cold War supports Nvidia's DLSS, and I was really keen to try that out. And I'll be honest, I was genuinely impressed with what I felt when turning DLSS on in Call of Duty. Instantly we gained a performance boost of around 25%, and I played for a good few hours with and without DLSS to really get a feel for how the game played. And I would be absolutely confident saying that DLSS does indeed give you a really hefty performance boost, full stop. With that said though, it's not a golden bullet. The resulting image, especially at high FPS and in the more frantic game modes where there's a lot of sprinting, sliding, constant aiming down sights and post-process effects galore, well, unfortunately artifacting and ghosting does creep in to the extent that it is actually noticeable while playing. Maybe on something slower paced like Warzone it would be less of an issue, but certainly in Cold War multiplayer, and especially in the frantic hardcore modes, I found that it become an annoyance in quite a few matches, and in the end when I was using the 3060, I simply decided to turn a few of the settings down to bump that frame rate up, while still maintaining the crispness and accuracy of the image rather than using DLSS. Still, the technology is undoubtedly cool, and with AMD's FSR now offering up something similar, it's something that is going to continue to mature and it will absolutely be the norm in a few years. The other headline technology that we haven't touched on yet is of course ray tracing, with the RDNA 2 architecture at the heart of the 6700 XT being AMD's first foray into having a product with dedicated ray tracing hardware, compared to the second generation hardware featured in the RTX 3000 series. Now recently the first game which requires an RT capable GPU launched, or I guess relaunched in the form of Metro X's Enhanced Edition. This overhaul means much better ray tracing quality visually, while the extensive optimizations means that it should actually run better than the original 2019 version ever could. Now, being that this is an Nvidia sponsored title and the Ampere lineup literally has RTX in its name, you would be forgiven for expecting the RTX 3060 to show the 6700 XT a clean pair of heels when it comes to RT performance. The reality though, it kind of paints a different picture. Now I'm using the benchmark tool, which is a little bit harder than average gameplay, but it is useful for giving an apples to apples comparison run when comparing two cards. Running the game at 1440p high settings with high ray tracing selected, along with a 4x VRS and full tessellation, the RTX 3060 returns an average of 48 FPS, with the 1% lows coming in at 33 FPS. Not too bad a showing for a game which is based fully around ray tracing. The 6700 XT though, on the same settings, returns an average FPS of 54, with its 1% lows coming in at 39. That's a 12% difference on average and 18% difference when you think about the 1% lows. Now, while the RX 6700 XT still wins convincingly here, compared with the 33% gap we've seen on the rasterization performance, when looking at a workload which places the focus firmly on RT, that performance gap closes in considerably. I mean, 13% difference on the average frame rate and 18% on the 1% lows is the closest I've seen between the two cards in my testing, and shows that despite AMD offering a better card for the money, Nvidia does have the more mature and stronger ray tracing hardware in their cards. It's just that in the 3060, there's simply not enough of that hardware in there to be competitive, which in some respects kind of makes you wish that the RTX 3060 was actually using the full fat GA106 die. The RTX 3060 does have a final trick up its sleeve though, in the form of DLSS 2.1 on Metro, using the quality preset for DLSS, which renders the game at around 67% of its native resolution and super samples it back up to 1440p. The average frame rate jumps up to 63 FPS, while the 1% lows come in at around 39. On the AMD card, we do have the option to use the in-house designed upsampling technology. So on it, using a render scale of 90%, which sets the internal resolution at 1296p, returns a similar kind of result, boosting the average frame rate to 63 FPS, with the 1% lows coming in at 44. While the 90% res scale on the 6700 XT was a little more pleasing overall in terms of image quality, the fact that the RTX 3060 can produce a similar sort of image but only using 67% of the native resolution shows just how much potential this technology has. But I do feel that in this test at least, things still kinda swing a bit in the RX 6700 XT's favour. So let's try to wrap this up then. In rasterization performance, the 6700 XT offers up performance which is a clear tier higher than the 3060, with on average a 33% advantage in favour of AMD's card. Compared to the RTX 3060, the 6700 XT also puts in what I would say is stronger than expected ray tracing performance, being on average 12% faster when using high RT settings on the enhanced edition of Metro Exodus, and a 1% low figure which is 18% higher. So with the price of the 6700 XT being around 20% more than the 3060, you're kinda getting similar price to performance in heavy ray tracing based applications, while it remains a much better value card in titles where ray tracing is used less or are purely rasterized. And I do think that this is still the key selling point here in mid 2021. When it comes to upscaling, DLSS can be impressive but limited in use, and I'd say that for the money I'd rather take the greater amount of pure grunt on offer from the 6700 XT than the promise of potential down the line with increased DLSS support. But it will be really interesting to see how these upscaling wars pan out over the next few years, and I can't wait to see the directions that both AMD and Nvidia take their respective ideas next. I am very eager to get my hands on AMD's true competitor to the 3060, the RX 6600 XT, and I do think that that card is going to have its work cut out for it to fight off the 3060, and it's really all going to come down to pricing on that one. But hey, I'm going to leave it there for today folks. Overall, it's two really good cards, just hampered by shoddy pricing. Whether that's going to change in the near to long term future, at this point it's anyone's guess. But hey, I'd love to know what you all think of these cards, if you see the pricing coming down anytime soon, if you've already got a 3060 or a 6700 XT. I do know that compared to the higher end cards, there's been loads of these on sale over the last few months, so I think it's probably safe to say that a fair few of them has managed to get into your hands, so let me know how you're getting on with them. To wrap this up, I'll just say stay safe, take care, and I'll see you all in the comment section down below, and in the next video.